Welcome back to Mind What Matters. Today you have just got me again, one last time, you guys. Sorry about my co-host, Nikki. She is tying up her movie in Greece and she will be back with us next week. Guys, I'm so excited about today's podcast. I don't know if you're in the caregiving space, if you're just finding us perhaps newly because you've had a loved one be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but there is a man by the name of Neal Shah, and he is blowing up my Instagram. And if you are on it and you have been in this space for a while, he is probably blowing up your algorithm too. His account is full of information about caregiving, the system, what's working with it, and what is not. He is really a fascinating guy. I'm going to just quickly read his bio and then we're going to dive right in because I've got a lot to pack in with this character in the next hour. Neal Shah is a former hedge fund manager turned social entrepreneur after deeply personal experiences with caregiving. Motivated by creativity and humanitarian progress, he co-founded and serves as CEO of CareYaya Health Technologies, a tech startup and applied research lab focused on enhancing care delivery. Its flagship product is a technology platform that lets people quickly book experienced caregivers that are all uniquely students in the healthcare field, helping expand the care workforce amid a critical caregiver shortage. In addition, CareYaya is launching new applications of artificial intelligence to help people better manage caregiving, aging, and serious illness. Its mission is to empower family caregivers and create a better future for care. Previously, Neal founded and managed a $250 million investment fund in New York, including a focus on healthcare investments, and prior to that was a partner to $1.5 billion private equity and hedge fund focusing on a variety of sectors. He started his career in investment banking at Credit Suisse First Boston after graduating from the University of Pennsylvania with degrees in philosophy and economics. Wow. This guy's a lot smarter than me, and he didn't realize he's about to get asked for a major donation to this nonprofit. Hi, Neal.
Hey, Liz. Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome to Mind What Matters. You really should have left that $1 billion number out of your bio.
Sadly, I'm blowing all my savings on CareYaya, but
yeah,
happy
but
to
like
collab too.
How great. Like seriously. My best friend Nikki is actually the one who gets the credit for finding you, and she's so mad at me that she's not going to be here this morning. We're going to have to do this again so that she can. But I am so pleased to have you. You are obviously you are a like-minded human in that you have taken a very clear something that has happened in your life that has been hard and difficult and tragic to navigate, and you have turned it into an incredible purpose. So kudos to you, because I personally know how hard it is to start something from the ground up and grow it. And what you're doing is incredible. You've basically created like Uber for caregivers or for people in need of caregivers, but only supplying the most top-notch ones out there. So let's just dive right in. How'd you get into this? Tell me how a $1 billion hedge fund manager goes from that world into caregiving.
When they become a caregiver, like many of us do. I was kind of totally oblivious to the care needs and, just kind of like this entire side of society. But, I was kind of like, I was good at investments. I had become a partner at a big fund in my late 20s. And I'd started my own fund in my early 30s. And, I grew that very fast from, initially I had one investor with 10 million. And then by the time I was 35, I was running 250 million. But really in my early 30s, I became a caregiver. And I think that really changed the trajectory of my life. My grandfather, as you can imagine, got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And really, I'm the one in the family who everybody relies on for like figure things out. So like, and as many caregivers can relate to, the system doesn't really give you a lot of resources, so literally my parents, grandparents, everyone was like, what should we do? Let's figure this out. So I just like went full into research mode, tried to understand, okay, what is going to happen over the next few years? How are we going to manage the care? How are we going to find care help? Because my mom and dad were working at the time. And I would say, I guess maybe the 30-second version of it is over the next few years, myself and my family were so frustrated with the care he was receiving and the care system after hiring and turning over so many different caregivers, going through home care agencies, all these other options, that my mom ended up just quitting her career and doing it full time. and that had second and third order consequences. She was in her late 50s at the time, has never been able to return to the workforce since. The stress and burden of it, I think, left her with severe PTSD, or what you call post caregiver, stress syndrome, even. Um,
Yep.
and
I do know.
but thankfully he did receive good care, and that started my obsession with kind of caregiving. That I was like, this is unbelievable how difficult this is to navigate. I feel like I can do something about it. I feel like I should fix it. At the time, I was still running my fund, so I started obsessively thinking, what are there innovations happening in the care economy that I can support, that I can fund? And unfortunately, like between when he passed, and I was running my fund and focusing on the care economy, my wife ended up getting severely ill and going through a multi-year cancer
Oh,
battle. And during that journey, it was
gosh.
like, at that point, I became in my mom's situation where I became primary caregiver. And it was very difficult. Any attempt to get outside care help was not easy. I kind of like learned firsthand of how much stress it puts on you as the primary caregiver.
Mhm.
I kept taking a lot of sabbaticals from running my fund to manage her care. And as you can imagine, it's like a very highly stressful competitive field where you can't really do that for that many extended periods of time. And then ultimately,
Oh,
because my wife's treatment was like touch and go, I ended up shutting down my fund to become her full time caregiver, and did that for a couple of years. And thankfully, knock on wood, she finally had a successful outcome, and has now been in remission for several years. But at that point, I'd gone through kind of like a secondary caregiving experience. I'd seen the impact on my entire family through it. Then I'd been the primary caregiver, seen the impact on my own career. And I mean, I'd worked really hard throughout my 20s and 30s to get to that position in my career to just kind of like fully walk
mhm.
away. But, thankfully, unlike my mom, I was fortunate that after my wife's care ended, I was almost 40. So I had like a chance to think about what do I do with the rest of my life and career. And yeah, I just became obsessed with caregiving. I was like, okay, I've found something I'm very passionate about. I have thankfully had a career where I've accumulated some savings that I can kind of like do something charitable and like philanthropic towards it. But so that's how I started CareYaya initially. I was just like, this is going to be like a good deed that I do with my own savings that I think there's something people can benefit from. And then over time, I've realized there's something really impactful here that can happen. But I've also just like the more I've gotten into the care economy, the more I've come up with other ideas and realized how many gaps there are. So now I've just become kind of like obsessed with it. I think there's so much we can do. But yeah, I would say it was like personally, it was a very painful few years. And I think that this is my own way of recovering from PCSD, if you will, is to like do something to help other caregivers. So
Well,
yeah,
there's nothing like, helping others. I always tell people when they're
yeah,
really in it and they're
yeah,
struggling and they're maybe approaching burnout or whatever it is,
yeah,
like go find somebody else who's in a worse
hmm,
position than you are and help
yeah,
them.
yeah,
Because
agreed.
honestly, it's the only way you get through it.
Yeah,
It's the whole reason this nonprofit was born. It really just
yeah,
started as a podcast for me to get to
yeah,
know other young people that were going
yeah.
through this. I was caregiving for my mother. She had early onset and I had 3 small children, like
Wow.
it was
Yeah,
so overwhelming and it was exhausting and I did not know what I was doing. And there just
yeah.
wasn't 10 years ago, there was not this conversation around caregiving that there
Hmm.
is now. There wasn't even a
Yeah,
word, you know? I mean,
yeah.
like last summer, I went to a documentary at the United Nations. Bradley Cooper was doing an entire documentary on
Oh,
it. And I got to
yeah,
sit and, like, be a part of a whole room full of people having this conversation. But a
yeah,
decade ago, that
yep,
was not the case. And it
yeah,
was really isolating and lonely. And I think for so many of us that have gone through the experience alone or most of our experience alone or sort of
yeah,
walking our way through the dark and not knowing what we're doing, when you come out the other side of that, it really changes you. It makes
yeah,
you into a different person. And you
yeah,
do have this internal drive to sort of change the landscape for the next guy doing it. And in my
yeah,
case, it was, this almost broke me. It was so impossible. It was so hard. It was so emotional. It was devastating to me and my whole family. But we had resources, we had financial
yep,
resources,
yeah,
and so many people don't. And that, in
yeah,
essence, is where Mind What Matters was born, was out of the need to help other people
yeah,
that could not afford to go get care. And I think one of the
yeah,
things you and I were talking, guys, Neal and I were talking before the podcast,
yeah,
before I hit record, one of the biggest hardships I have as a
yeah,
nonprofit leader is getting the government on my side to say, hey, you're a worthy cause. Because right
yeah,
now they consider me giving out cash grants to underprivileged caregivers as waste. They're like, it's not
Yeah.
sustainable. You can do it once, but it's not going to make a difference. And I feel very, very strongly against that. I think when
Yeah.
you're at the end, as I told you, Neal, like, you don't do 24/7 Alzheimer's care for 13 years, 10 years. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really only the 24/7 care towards those last few years. And if you can be the knot that somebody ties at the end of their rope and just to hold on
Yeah.
a little bit longer, it makes all the difference in the world. And essentially, that's what you're giving people. So, explain what CareYaya is. That's this, you're the CEO of this company that you founded. Explain what it does, because I think it's such a unique model. I love this. Like, it's so cool. I
Yeah.
want to know
Thank you.
how many cities you're in. I want to know how
Sure.
people can get in touch and get involved. Like, just tell me all the details, including, if it's
Sure.
not too much on the tech side, how you went about this. Because
Sure.
I don't know, like, do you just go out and find like tech geniuses to like come up with a software? Like, how does this all
Yeah.
work?
Yeah, yeah. So I have a tech genius co-founder who has been awesome, and we built it together from the early days. And basically the way the platform works is, like you mentioned, it's kind of like Uber. So we're in like over 15 different cities right now. We have 50,000 students on the platform, and if you are taking
Wow.
care of a loved one, yeah, it's grown a lot, and it's like fully like impact funded. We charge nothing for the service, which is also so similar to you. I also have like some long-term sustainability things to figure out. But it's cool to see it's making an impact. So in a nutshell, here's the way the platform works. If you need care for your mom or dad, and let's say I'll just kind of make up a scenario. If you're in Nashville and if your mom is living in LA, you might be managing the care long distance. And if your mom needs caregivers around, let's say 20, 30, 40 hours a week, these local care agencies are charging $40 to $50 an hour in most of the big cities to do that work. Unfortunately, they're paying the care worker less than half that money. So I live in North Carolina, where like if the care agency was charging $40 an hour, they're paying the care worker 15. All that other money is going to waste. So families can't afford the care, because if you do the math on like 20, 30, 40 hours a week, it's very quickly pushing like 2,000 a week. The average cost of
Hmm.
in-home care in America is $82,000 a year for a 40-hour week worker. Which means if you're a working middle-aged person and you're paying for that, you have to earn 130,000 pre-tax to be able to pay that much, or your parents have to have a lot of savings. So the two stats I'll leave people with is it's $82,000 a year to get home care. The average care worker in America is making $34,000 a year. Yeah, like enough said. It's like the businesses are taking all the money, but they are doing like none of the work. Once the care workers in the home, they're doing like 99% of the hard work. Why are they getting paid
Hmm.
less than half the money? So I think it's grossly inefficient. And as a result, families are being overcharged. And as a result, any care worker that can get a job at McDonald's, Burger King, Walmart, they're out. So who's going to stay in, right? People who can't get other jobs, because for the care workers, this is very hard work, and it's not very, it's not paying well. So what CareYaya does is the exact opposite. We find the best caregivers in America, which, in my opinion, from my all these years of caregiving, were healthcare students, people in nursing
Hmm.
school, people who are pre-medical, who want to become doctors, physician assistants one day at the top 50 universities in the country. We connect them with families to be the in-home companion caregiver. We only do companion level care, like not high acuity, but 61% of older adults just need a kind of a caring companion around. And we do that at no fees or markups. Families pay the students directly. And in most markets, it's between $17 to $20 an hour. So it's 50% more affordable than agencies. So a lot of families who are priced out of the care market can afford this. And the students are unbelievably reliable, conscientious, on time. I remember some of my pains in caregiving, both through my grandfather's care and my wife's care, were one, the costs were very high, but then on top of that, the quality was fairly low, and 15% of the shifts would be no show, or multiple
Hmm.
hours late. And like people just cannot tolerate that. So I found that to be a big challenge. In this case with CareYaya, the students are very on time. Less than 1% are, any noticeable amount late. No shows are unheard of. So these are big advantages that I think you can have in the traditional care economy in the, kind of tech enabled student care economy that you can have in like the traditional care economy. So that's kind of like some high level.
So what you're telling us is basically we should all go buy stock in these companies that are charging all of this crazy high
They're all owned by
amounts.
private
But
equity. Sadly, these
but
private equity firms are just milking it. Yeah.
God, that's depressing. I mean, like, really,
Or
that's
don't buy
so
stock
depressing,
because
and it's
I
true.
believe they will be
Right.
disrupted. I believe these will go away.
You do.
And I'm not the only one trying to do this. I hope other people are too. But I believe people like this is not sustainable. Charging $40 an hour for care while paying the care worker 15, that's not going to last. Either I'll break that or somebody else will break that. But I think technology will disrupt. And these companies are like the taxi cab companies before Uber came along. They're done. They're not done yet, but you can predict it out and they'll be done in a few years.
That's wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big prediction right there. It's gonna be I'll be
I'm
interested to
working
follow
towards
that
that, but
to see.
but you can see the writing on the
Well,
wall, because it's not serving
here's the
anyone.
thing
It's
that's
not serving anyone besides the company owners,
no.
you know?
Well, it's least of all not serving the caregivers that are actually the
Mhm.
paid hourly workers. I mean, these are people,
Agreed.
particularly, I mean, I remember the ones that my mom had, they would leave her shift and
Yeah.
they would go to another job in order to like support themselves. These people like weren't sleeping. And,
I've
you
had
know, you
caregivers that are doing
said,
the food line, that are like doing a second shift at the
yeah,
grocery store to make ends meet. Yeah, because they're not getting paid anything, and it's like, and then when you as a family member are upset about it, it's not even their fault. It's the company's paying them nothing. So meanwhile, the company's charging you an arm and a leg. Yeah.
right, right. So where's all that money
Yeah.
going? Private equity, I
Mhm.
guess.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I guess the really sad part about it is what you said about the 40-hour work, 40 hours a
Yeah.
week being $83,000 a year. When you get to those last 3 or 4 years of Alzheimer's care, that's not going to cut it.
Mhm.
You've got to
Mhm.
have, more like
$200,000 a
80.
year, right?
You've gotta
Yeah.
have 80 hours a week of care because
Yeah.
basically from the moment that they're awake until they
Yeah.
go to bed at night, they need companionship, and sometimes
Yep.
they can still, like, just wake up and maybe, like, wander around the house for 30 minutes. There's a little bit of wiggle room there, but, like, if they really need watching while they're during waking
Yeah.
hours and your goal is to keep your loved one at home, you're talking about a lot more care. I mean, my mother was in assisted living, and she still required round-the-clock care
Yeah.
because if she woke up in her room alone, she was terrified. The agitation
Yeah.
started, the upset started. She started
Yeah.
sundowning at like 1 o'clock every day. She couldn't be alone. And, I think where a lot of families get pushed into a very dark corner sometimes is I remember it being thrown out there to our family that, like, look, once you move her to assisted living, yes, it's a bit more expensive. There's a nurse on the floor. If she's not able to just kind of stay in her room and be quiet, then we'll just use medication to keep her in her
Oh
room
my
and being
god, don't even
quiet.
get me started on that. Yeah, chemical restraints, and like, I mean, yeah,
Yes.
it's a dark. It's and I made an Instagram post about that, and oh my god, I got so much hate on that. And I was like, look, guys, it's a reality. Of course, the industry doesn't want to admit that publicly, but it's a dark side.
No,
Yeah,
of course they
it's
don't,
really
but it
dark side. Yeah,
absolutely is a part of it. I mean,
yeah,
when we and this is like obviously like way too much personal information probably than we want to go into, but like I didn't feel that my mom was quite ready for a nursing home, but I was
yeah,
not her power of attorney. I wasn't able
yeah,
to sort of make that final decision. And it does get so hairy at the end, like making that decision of like, when is it time? When is it too soon? How do you handle it? It's never pretty, or it's usually not pretty. But
yeah,
when you
yeah,
are kind of faced with like, okay, I've got $400,000 left in my parents',
yeah,
savings account or whatever. How are we going to make that,
yeah,
last a decade or
yeah.
longer with one of these
Yep,
longstanding diseases? So like that's why families get so pushed in these
I agree.
last years, and they get so dependent on like, oh, well, what do I do? And they're asking not really doctors at this point. They're asking like people who are running nursing homes. And
Yeah,
that is dangerous.
I agree.
You want to talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that? Give
Yeah,
me
yeah,
your
sure.
opinion
I
on
mean, I
this.
think why don't let's say maybe an overarching thing I would talk about is why are families being put in this situation? So you mentioned the government. Here's where I think the government has made a grave policy error, but I think it's never too late and it can fix it. Nursing homes are subsidized through Medicare and Medicaid funding and also health insurance companies, right? Dementia drugs are heavily subsidized through Medicare funding. Minimal efficacy, by the way. $30,000 a year on some of these dementia drugs, and they barely even really work, and unclear if the side effect is even worth the cost. Guess how much the government is paying for home based care worker? Zero, right? I
Nothing.
mean, yeah, like why? Like why is that? No wonder everybody's being pushed to. What if the government said, hey, does your mom or dad want this $30,000 a year dementia drug? Or would you like to decide? I wrote an op ed about this. Would you like to decide you want to allocate your $30,000 to paying a home care worker? You know, do you want a, nursing home through Medicaid or even like Medicare partially covering? Or would you like to use that money to home care worker or for yourself to be the care worker. I mean, I think just like the government, I think I know I have a lot of theories around this, but it's we have overly prioritized institutional care in our country, and that is a
Hmm.
government policy decision that is then having a second and third order impact. And we have under prioritized home based caregiving and or family caregiving. And I think that is a major policy mistake that needs to be fixed.
So how do we do it? What's the first step?
I
How
think,
do we like
yeah,
start the conversation and get people behind this? Because I do believe that there are enough family caregivers out there now that would follow, that would get behind us and like just lead the charge because it's unsustainable. I mean, you want to talk about unsustainable. It's
yeah,
what the government has put on family caregivers as we are approaching the silver tsunami. And guys,
yes,
for everybody listening, that's just like a kind of a jokester phrase that we use in the caregiving world to say the number of people that are about to get this disease is expected to triple over the next
yeah,
15 years. So
yes,
think about the number of people who, this is what I always tell people, think about the number of hospital beds that were full with COVID patients in 2020. So you could triple that just about. I mean, like, you don't have enough beds to put everybody
yeah,
with Alzheimer's or dementia in a hospital bed right now in this country. There's not enough, and
yeah,
it's only going to get worse. So as this sort of silver tsunami approaches, what can we be doing? I mean, obviously, like the whole prevention talk is huge.
yeah,
However, I think we're talking about preventing it in our kids now, not really
yeah,
us,
not
because
in,
as we
yeah,
know,
yeah,
dementia starts 20 to 30 years in the brain before you've ever had a symptom. But, 42% of cases are preventable. That's great with diet and lifestyle changes. But what do we do for the people, like probably, I would say in their 30s right now, who are really going to be hit the hardest, I believe, in their
yeah,
40s and 50s in this with this caregiving crisis. Yeah. So everybody
yeah,
who's walking around right now and you thinking you're cute, your little millennial self, it's coming for you.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not going to be an easy road. It's just not.
yeah.
So how can we sort of what can we do? Like, honestly, Neal, like, what could we do?
Yeah. No, I think the great question. So I think part of what we do is I think the government is not subsidizing home-based care because these companies are charging 45 bucks an hour. And the government's like, there's no way I can afford it. And it's going to be a ridiculous waste of money because the care worker's not getting anything. So I'm not going to leak hundreds of billions of dollars of money directly into the pockets of these kind of private equity owned home care companies. So I think first is, what society can do and what CareYaya is doing, and I hope other people do too, is do affordable care innovation. So figure out streamlined ways to bring care workers into homes safely, reliably, conveniently booked, scheduled, etc., through technology to greatly lower the cost of delivering home-based care. If you go to the government and say, "Hey, I have a solution nationwide that's doing this at $20 an hour. You guys should start subsidizing and doing pilots to help families." The government is way more likely to say, "Hey, $20 an hour, sure, you know what? I'll give certain families 1,000 hours of care," as opposed to $45 an hour. The government's like, "I'm not going to pay 45,000 on this. Maybe I'll pay 20." So I think one is like the innovation ecosystem needs to step up, whether that's private sector entrepreneurs, nonprofits, whoever. Just like figure out ways to deliver care cheaper and good quality that then the government can say, "I will back." And I think these home care agencies are not playing for the government market. They're just playing
Mm-mm.
for the top
No.
1% of the wealthy people. So I feel like you need to
Right.
do affordable middle class innovation, which is like really our motto, at CareYaya. And of course, like, well-to-do people use it too because it's just better product, cheaper. But really, I think
Yeah.
people need to build something the government can back. Secondly, I think individuals need to advocate. Because I think the government, due to the heavy lobbying pressure from the nursing home, assisted living, these are massive real estate sectors, so they're lobbying like
Mhm.
crazy. But like, who's lobbying to get family caregivers paid? Who's lobbying to get informal care workers covered by government programs? Like, no one, right? So like, the lobbying is disproportionate. But who has larger lobbying power if they mobilized? Caregivers. Like, there's 60 something million caregivers. There's 11 million dementia caregivers. There's several million cancer caregivers. When you add Parkinson's, ALS, like you add all this up, there's so many caregivers. And we're not even, let alone kids with special needs. I mean, there's so many markets that families are dealing with this on their own. If caregivers mobilized, it's so much larger than any of these special interest groups. So I
Mhm.
think that mobilizing caregivers is a big, and as our work grows, I'm starting to shift a lot more of my time and work into, and this is why I'm like more active on Instagram and things now, trying to mobilize caregivers to like push, because I feel like the government is open and understanding that caregivers need stuff, but there really isn't a voice in DC. So I feel like we need to create that. And I think thirdly is we need to show ROI because both the government and the private sector focus on spending money to either save money or make money. So I feel like the cleanest ROI here you can be shown is, let's just say, I was thinking about this too, and I speak with a lot of hospital systems about this. If you get people home based care, you're less likely to have ER visits. You're less likely to have hospitalizations with major issues that cost a lot of money. And ultimately, Medicare's paying that money, private insurance is paying that money, Medicaid sometimes is paying that money. So at some point, simply preventing 2 to 3 ER visits a year is worth it to have caregivers around 40 hours a week. Simply preventing a major hospitalization because somebody had a complication from a UTI that no one caught early, and then that hospitalization ended up costing $30,000, and Medicare paid, but still, it's a lot of money. You
Or
could have prevented that by having care around. Yeah,
not even
okay.
just like a hospitalization stay that's like brief from an illness, but what
Hmm.
about somebody who takes a spill and, breaks a leg or breaks an arm and then has to leave the hospital and go to a skilled nursing facility
Yeah,
for 2, 3 months while they do rehab. And then you're talking about rehab fees and everything else.
you're
Like
right.
it is costing our government, it will cost our government over $1 trillion a year annually by the time the silver tsunami crests. And when you think about that level of spending,
Yeah,
talk about not sustainable.
yep.
You know what I mean?
It's nuts, and I think that having a person around both reduces the risk of all those things happening and significantly improves quality of life, check in, safety, even like mentally, like
Mhm.
psychologically, people feel better by having a companion around. So I actually think that, people need to prove this, but it's like very intuitive and logical to me that having caregivers around reduces downstream healthcare costs. And I think that's the type of numbers that government and health insurance companies and Medicare care about. Of course, they want to do social good, but really, when you start talking money, they listen. And I feel like right now, if you get the cost of care down and you start proving out the benefits from a preventative and cost reduction perspective, I actually think the whole system will flip and then they'll start covering this. So I think that's kind of on us all in the caregiving ecosystem to prove that out. And then, frankly, the final thing I'll say is a second order, kind of what you talked about the 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds workforce. How many millions of people are going to quit their jobs? I mean, I left the workforce, right? And, it's like, hey, does the finance industry, is it worse off that I kind of left? Yeah, yes, but whatever, good, I'm doing caregiving now. But, okay, are there millions of people like that in all these industries that in the prime of their career, they're going to leave? Okay, that's not good for the tax base. That's not good for our long term kind of like private sector. So I actually think employers will start pushing too that, hey, why don't we figure out a way to get all these people help so that they can actually stay gainfully employed? Just like we've made
Keep their jobs.
groundbreaking, yeah, like look at childcare, from the 1980s and 1990s to today. We've started doing a lot around childcare because companies realized all these people are going to leave in the prime of their career. So I think that that's another positive ROI issue that if the government supports, people can keep doing their jobs and not just leave. Because once you leave for a few years, it's very hard to go back, as like we know tons of people, who've been in that situation. And that's a net loss for the economy. So yeah, I think for all
This
those
is
reasons we
why
can start.
This is why
Yeah.
people that are in government should have had to be in business.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, like you really should have had to know how to run a business like effectively to be in government and policy making because
Yeah.
we have right now a bunch of people who are like
Yeah.
willy-nillying it out there and it is creating so much waste. There are a few states out there now. Vermont is one, Florida is one. I
Yeah.
think maybe Arizona, that do offer like a serious stipend for caregivers to kind of like draw a salary, which is like another way that we could sort of frame all of this is, hey, let's empower or let's encourage these children of adult parents to stay home and care for their parents, and we'll actually pay them, we'll monetize this to encourage them to
Yeah.
do so. But that doesn't
Yeah.
help with the problem that you're talking about, which is they can't also do their jobs and do that. So it pulls them out of the workforce and then it's like, how do they get back in it when they're done? Because sometimes
Yep.
this takes, up to
Years.
7, 8, 10 years.
Yeah.
In my mom's
Yeah.
case, it was 13 from start to finish. That's a long
Wow.
time. And I was
Yeah. Yeah.
27 when it started. And,
Wow.
by the time she passed, I was 42. And
Yeah.
that's a
Wow.
lot of years. That's a lot of years of somebody's life. And then, oh, by the way, if you've lost one parent, maybe then by the time you're in your 40s, you're dealing with the other one.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
this is like a problem that can last up to 20 years for a lot of people that are in the sandwich generation. And they are not only are they unsupported with resources and sort of
Yeah.
what to do. I don't know if, you experienced this, but like
Yeah.
every time I left my mom's neurologist office, I was more confused than when
Oh,
I
yeah.
entered
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's compounded by the fact that while you're there, generally speaking, you're only going once a year. And most of those visits, you're getting some sort of mini mental test or a cognitive exam,
Yeah.
which is terrifying for your loved one and even more terrifying for you. I mean, I would sit there and I mean, my heart would just be racing the entire
Yeah.
time. And I was just like watching my mom and just hoping that we would make it through the next 20 minutes. And I could see the fear in her eyes and in her face when she was taking those tests. And I was trying to like stay upbeat and stay positive while at the same time realizing like year over year, I could see the decline. I could see the way the test was changing. And so how do you hide that on your
Yeah.
face while you're
Yeah.
there? So it's
Yeah.
this internal emotional battle that's happening when you're in that room as a caregiver, right? Because you're like clinging to the doctor for help and support, but meanwhile your brain is just fried because you're so grief ridden and feeling sad and anxious and seeing what's in front of you that by
Yeah.
the time that the exam is over, you have nothing left to even think to ask the questions that you need to withstand, to sustain you for the next 12 months of like, what should I
Yeah.
expect? What should I do? What should I be looking for? But for most people, that's it. That's your one shot. You've got your doctor's visit maybe once or twice a year at best,
Yep.
and you're done. And so you can't even lead on your doctor for support.
Yeah.
And I think, it's you've obviously heard this, I'm sure, but the diagnose
Yeah.
and adios thing. If you can
Yeah.
even get a diagnosis, that takes 3 years at a minimum.
Mhm.
We definitely need to change that too. But
Yeah.
like, I often tell people when I'm counseling families on like how to walk through this process is get yourself a good general practitioner and get to know
Yep.
them really well because they're going to be your best friend. You don't even, I
Yep.
mean, I'm not saying you don't need a neurologist, but like, they're not helping you a lot. And as you said, a lot of these dementia drugs that we're putting our loved ones on, do they work? Eh.
Yeah.
Aricept for like 6 weeks. Do you get a rebound and see some improvement right when you start it? Absolutely, you do. And it's really great. And then they go right back to where they were before, and
Yep.
everybody's almost like sadder than you were in the beginning.
Yeah.
Then maybe
Yeah.
they'll add Namenda on top of it, right? To like make it last a little longer. Does it slow the progression of the disease maybe this much? Maybe. We'll see. Over the course of the next 100 years, we'll really have some good data that comes in that shows us that, but maybe not. These new drugs, the infusions, don't even get me started. You're costing
Yeah.
families hundreds of thousands of dollars. In one
Yep.
case, I heard, I don't want to like say the hospital on record because I don't want to get caught with my pants down in that regard. But like people were paying to get on the wait lists of these
Oh my
hospitals
God. Wow. Wow.
when these first came
Wow.
out. And,
Wow.
every third person who I've told not to do it has come back to me being like, yep, my parent wound up with a brain bleed or whatever. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's just, you're not going
I
to
just talked to a
cure.
neighbor about this where she's taking care of her husband and they're pushing it so hard, and it's like you feel like why not, but people don't
Uh-huh.
realize the drawbacks. And it's like, I mean, I hate to say it, but there's a lot of financial interest in pushing this stuff, which is really unfortunate, but meanwhile,
Of course there
all
is.
the stuff that is known to work, which is getting care, enjoying cognitive stimulation, conversations with people, going for walks, like that stuff's not pushed. And all this like money making stuff is pushed that has major side effects and unclear benefit. So yeah, I think that our system is like poorly designed. So I think that the recommendation you give to people is great. I would echo that too. Get yourself a great general practitioner, geriatrician, anyone who will spend the time consultatively with you and not just be incentivized to push new therapies that may or may not work. Yeah, I think that's a great advice.
I was just
So,
going to say, I'm not trying to rob people of hope.
yeah, yeah,
Like I think just like with cancer, if you're at an end stage and there's a clinical trial out there that you want to try, you do it. Like you do whatever you've got to do to feel like you've done it. Like I
yeah.
was pushing the Bredesen protocol at one point with my mom, which was
Mm,
just about
hmm.
the most ridiculous thing in the whole world. But like I had her eating raw celery and raw carrots and raw broccoli. I mean, she didn't eat anything cooked for like 2 months.
Wow.
And finally, like I've told this story before on the podcast, but if you're a new listener, I'll just briefly describe what happened. There was one afternoon that my mom walked in where she was just bounced in, hair in a ponytail, like she was dressed nice, she had on some makeup, and she was just herself. I can't describe it. Like she hadn't been like that in 5 years, probably.
Wow.
And I literally dropped to my knees in front of her. And I put my arms around her and I hugged her and I started bawling my eyes out. And I
Yeah.
was like,
Wow.
Mom, like, you're back. Like, oh
Yeah.
my God, it's working. Like, it's working. And
Yeah.
she started crying too. And she put her arms around me and she's like, I'm so sorry. It's like I've been in a bog. It's like I've been in a bubble and I haven't been able to get out. And I
Wow.
haven't been the mom that you've needed. And I haven't been the
Wow.
grandmother that your children needed. And I'm so sorry. And we have this like hugely emotional moment.
Yeah.
And then a great afternoon together, an
Yeah.
evening. She leaves. She comes back the next day, just like she always did, back to the same old person that she was
Wow.
before. And I
Wow.
mean, the loss of like having that high from the good day. But then I was like, Dr. Bredesen, you have cured my
Yeah.
mother. Like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to immortalize you, you know?
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
fall was so
Yeah.
hard the next day. I mean, it just about killed me, honestly.
Wow.
Like,
Wow.
I will spend the rest of my life every time somebody tells me, "Have you read this book by Dr. Dale Bredesen?" I'm like, don't even." Like, I will literally. You don't want to ask me about that,
Yeah.
but like, I think to provide false hope is also
Yeah.
really tough. You
Yeah.
know, that's it's not criminal per se, but I don't know. It's like emotionally criminal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. And I think that, and you never know. I think some people might try different protocols, and don't get me wrong, some of these drugs might even work. But I just think generally, like, we know spending time with people works in the sense of
Works.
reduces the caregiver stress, improves the quality of life for the person with Alzheimer's. And how is that so not supported or under supported? Meanwhile, all this other stuff is not only heavily supported, oftentimes fully funded. So
Funded.
I think we just need to level the playing field, and let people decide that, do you want this experimental drug, or would you like, I've thought about, like, why wouldn't Medicare just allocate, you have gotten, you as in like your mom or dad has gotten Alzheimer's. We're going to set aside this amount of money every year. You choose. Do you want expensive infusions? Do you want this new drug? Do you want to pay home care workers? Do you want to pay assisted living? Do you want to pay nursing? We will just allocate the money to you. The family decides. And I think that then allows a lot of freedom. But currently we don't. We pay for certain things, we don't pay for other things. And as a result, everybody goes one way. And it's like, well, if they're paying
Right.
for the drug, why not? Maybe it'll help. And then, oh, I
Right.
need all this, but it's all out of pocket. Okay, now I'm gonna have to go through a lot of stress. So I think sometimes, like, the system's incentives are so perverse that it results in, like, potentially, I wouldn't even say bad decisions being made. Just like, what do you expect people to decide if you pay for one thing and don't pay for the other thing? Everybody's gonna go for the paid thing.
Yeah.
So I think the system's incentives need to be changed.
And everybody tends to like follow the trends too, right?
Yeah.
And with caregiving, it's not any different, unfortunately. You know, if you had a best friend whose mom or dad had Alzheimer's, you're probably going to call them and see what they did, and then you're going to do what they did. Like that's just
Yeah.
kind of the way it goes, I'm afraid. And
Yeah.
until we sort of like reverse this cycle, and other countries have done it. Neal, other countries are doing it better than we are, particularly in Europe, Mexico.
Yeah.
Mexico has great care, like
Yeah.
really phenomenal care for
Yeah.
their loved ones at home. What do you think is like going back to the first thing we talked about, really mobilizing this community? What's the
Yeah.
first step to doing that? Like, is there an organization out there that you know of right now that like everyone could get behind and sort of say like, oh, okay, they're already kind of doing this. Like, you should call them, like get on board if you're interested. Like, where
Yeah,
is
great
like
question.
a place that people could put their energy right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think some people are trying. I see, like, a lot of stuff AARP is trying to do. I see a lot of stuff National Alliance for Caregiving is trying to do. And it's like good and it's well intended, but I don't feel like it's mobilizing to the max of what you could be, because it's not just purely caregiver support and advocacy for caregiver policies. Or if it is, it's not very practical. And I think that is where there's like a different interests. Like, for example, Aijen, who runs Caring Across
Hmm.
Generations, I think she does a great job, but a lot of it is about paid caregiver workforce getting better pay, which is like helpful in a
Hmm.
way. But family caregivers may or may not be down with that, because when family caregivers hear that, they just think, oh, the cost of care I'm going to pay is going to go up, even
Is gonna
though,
go
because
up.
like the companies will just pass through that cost to the family. So I think that you kind of have this fragmented ecosystem of, like, who is really mobilizing family caregivers to get in home care paid for, or have family caregivers have a flexibility of options? I don't think anyone. I think they all have their own different interests. So I actually think that there's an opening, and we've been trying to think about. And hey, by the way, if you're down, we should build it ourselves. Mobilizing family caregivers to say family caregivers just need to be directly paid or directly allocated money, like an HSA account, right? Like your mom gets Alzheimer's, they should just give you an HSA account that, hey, Medicare will just be funding 20,000 or 30,000 in HSA. Whether you buy the drug, whether you do this, whether you do this, that's on you. I think nobody's mobilizing that. And I think that's the big opportunity. And nobody's mobilizing that because all the other participants have their own special interests of where they're being funded from.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think that that is a big unmet need and opportunity. So, we're kind of like trying
And
to build that. And I think that, yeah, if you're interested, we'd love to collaborate. But I think that's a big
you're
opportunity.
going to need a nonprofit for that, my friend. But I apparently am
Mind
going to
what
have a
matters.
separate,
I know one.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I have to have a second wing. So I didn't know
Yeah.
this. At
Yeah.
least I'm not sure about this, but I have been told that just the nonprofit itself, like the 501c3, cannot do the advocacy work. I have to have, like, for instance, if somebody wanted to write me a check for $10,000 for
Hmm.
advocacy, I cannot deposit that into a 501c3. It has to
I
be
see.
a specifically run advocacy nonprofit, and that they have to be two separate entities. So one can
Yeah.
be like, I can take donations for advocacy. I cannot
Yeah.
take donations for respite care and use
I
it on
see. Yeah.
advocacy, if
yeah.
that makes any
Good point.
sense.
Yeah.
But
But hey,
it's
it's
easy to set
complicated. Yeah.
up. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not hard to do, and we certainly already have the name brand. So
Yeah. The
on
timing is
caregiving.
great. Why I think the timing is great is
Mm-hmm.
there's a midterm election coming up. Research from
Yep.
Johns Hopkins has come out surveying partisan attitudes to caregiving, and it is a surprisingly bipartisan issue. 81% of Republicans
Mm-hmm.
support caregiving to be more supported, 79% of Democrats. So it's actually interestingly more Republicans than Democrats support caregiving, but broadly, majority of both side of voters support. And yet, I've thought about this from a politician's perspective. Like the politicians should be taking on messages that they think resonate with the mass audience, and
Right.
very few have
Right.
taken on caregiving. But I feel like it is now hitting that societal level of awareness. So you got a midterm election coming up. It's going to be highly fought in a lot of these congressional seats. This would be a great time to do a massive advocacy arm, keep it bipartisan, so that way there's no kind of like bias one way or the other. And then really, it's just
Mm-hmm.
like bring up in town hall meetings across the country. Anyone's running for a Senate seat from North Carolina? Okay, I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat. What are you going to do about caregiving? And just like start asking a bunch of questions, and we're in North Carolina, so that's why I first thought of
Neil,
that. But, you guys,
it looks
yeah.
like we're gonna meet each other on the steps of Capitol Hill. This is
Yes,
awesome. I love it.
yes,
I
yeah,
love it. I mean,
yeah,
this is
because I
how
think
you
that's the way you can
create.
make change. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I'm never going to be against care homes. I think for some people, it is the only choice, especially when you reach a certain level of care, a certain, like, certain point in these diseases. Not as much for like cancer or,
yeah,
kids with special needs or things
yeah,
like that. But for something like Alzheimer's, where really and truly, like, you're talking about somebody who's not ambulatory, they're incontinent, they're not speaking, that's hard. That's really hard to do in stages at home. Now, is it impossible? No. But if you've got small kids, like I
yeah,
did, I was pleading for my mom to come and live with us. That is what I wanted. And my husband, my family was like, Liz, I don't think you understand what this is going to be like, at the very, very end, and what that's going to be like for our kids
yeah,
when, like, let's
yeah,
say we're having a dinner party and that's downstairs. And I'm not saying, like, listen, the people I'm helping, there's no other option, that
yeah,
they're faced
yeah,
with that and they're doing it every
yeah,
single day because that's what they have to do and they don't have another choice. And I did, and I do think, like, even the little bit that my kids were seeing my mom at the very end was very impactful to them. I don't think it was bad for them to see her that way. I
yeah,
think it made them deeply empathetic and really remarkable kids for what they were part of and what they saw. But, like, even my youngest, who was like only, see, he's 10 now, so he was 7.5, when she passed
yeah,
away, but he probably didn't see her much that last
yeah,
year. He was the one that I really did shield the most. My older two
yeah,
saw her a bit more, but even at 7, like when she died, he still now at 10 remembers how she was the few times he saw her in that last year. And it was frightening to him. He was the
yeah,
one who actually told me, um, Mom, I don't want to come visit anymore. Like, it
yeah,
makes me sad. And I was like, okay, I get it. And so I'm never going to sit here on, some
Yeah.
perch and say care homes are bad, because I do think that there is a place for them. But there is so much money that is being spent there
Yeah.
that could be spent, on these loved ones that have 7 to 8 years at home where they're still active and joyful and caring and happy, and they want to be a part of everybody's life. And they can be, they're conversive and they're talking and they're a part of things, particularly when it's just dementia. It's not
Yeah.
a rapidly progressing Alzheimer's. Those are
Yeah.
two very different things. And somebody could live a wonderful life with dementia for like
Yep.
8 years. They shouldn't be parked in a wheelchair at some care home just because that's the only way their family can provide for them. That's not
Yeah.
fair. It's not fair to them.
Agreed.
It's not fair to their families, especially when it's
Yeah.
just like you said, all going to private equity, and it's padding the pockets of some dude who's, already making 20 billion a year and playing golf 8 days a week,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. And yeah, you're 100% right. And frankly, I think I already see many families that we help are kind of doing this sometimes out of necessity, where they don't have the money to put them in a home. Somebody will just like take a step back in their career, move the parents in. In some cases, I've even seen both parents have Alzheimer's and they move in with the family.
yep.
And actually, so this rising trend of what they call multi-generational living, it's not just related to Alzheimer's and dementia. People are moving in anyway, but I think Alzheimer's and dementia is sometimes driving more of it. I'm seeing a lot of people deal with it. And actually, remarkably, all the generations are benefiting. Like the younger generation is enjoying
Hmm.
spending time with the older generation. The older generation, if like the dementia is like slowly progressing, in many cases, they're enjoying this quality time they're spending with their children and grandchildren. And unfortunately, where it's breaking is one of the middle aged people, is taking time off from their work to do a lot of this work themselves with no pay or support and is going to have a very
Right.
difficult time re entering their career. It most of the time happens to be the woman, but I've seen men do this too. There's actually a great Instagram account called the Melty Middle. I don't know if you follow them, but I would highly recommend them.
Mm-mm.
But I know the family, and the husband actually took a step back from his career, and he's taking care of the in-laws. And it's like heartwarming. They put all this content, and they have like young kids. They're taking care of the in-laws and like keeping them pretty active, like doing stuff around the house, doing yard work, and it's just like I think they did the multi-generational living out of financial necessity, but it is just like awesome. I think you can imagine that everybody is benefiting from that experience. The older people are going to live longer. The older people are likely going to be happier as they age. And,
Hmm.
unfortunately, the middle aged people are going to be totally screwed financially from that because they just went to single income. And that is, I think, the heartbreaking part that if they had put somebody in a facility or if they had, kind of gotten drugs, like the government would have been funding a bunch of that, but why isn't the government funding even a modest amount here? Because somebody's
Right.
having to take a big career hit and financial hit. So I think it's like, but I think that is a rising trend, which I like to see that people are doing that in the face of lack of support.
Hmm. No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And further to that point, you talk about even how you get into some of these facilities. You've got to cough
Hmm.
up your life savings, and then you're guaranteed, lifetime care. So, like, okay, if your loved one ends up in skilled nursing, they have a fall that requires, them to be in full time nursing care, or whatever. Then that's covered until end of life. But at the end, your parent, that's it. You've given them
Yeah,
everything. And
yeah,
if they don't need any of that and all they do is just pass away, peacefully in their sleep one night, 2 years in, well, you've given it away no matter what.
yeah,
And that is just, I mean, I guess it's like an insurance, it works like an insurance policy, but
yeah,
good grief, that's a lot of waste, that could go towards helping families in such a different way. Well, you and I are going to talk more. This is,
yes, 100%.
there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah,
You've sort of ignited like a different layer of my interest that I've had for a long time, but I just quite honestly
cool.
haven't known what to do about it. So many of these
Yeah,
diseases that have these advocacy wings, they're all fighting for just their own.
yeah,
And I've noticed that. Like it's not a collective thing. I've even fought against myself in that realm because I'm like,
eh,
well, full-time caregiving. I mean, should I be giving grants to parents of level 3 autistic
yeah,
moms or and
yeah,
dads, or should I be giving cancer grants or whatever? And, whenever I bring this up on board calls or whatever, everyone's like, Liz, you can't do everything well. You've got to
yeah,
pick a
yeah,
lane and you've got to stay in it. But for this part, for caregiving specifically, A
Yeah.
caregiver is a caregiver is a caregiver. And I don't care if it
I
lasts
agree.
for 2 years or for 15, you're dealing with the same level of fatigue and emotions and guilt and anxiety and all the things. It's no different. You're grieving while you're
Yeah.
caring, and it's hard no matter what. Even if there's hope at the end. With Alzheimer's, ALS, there's no hope. You're walking that journey like, I know how this is ending. And
Yeah.
there's a specific type of pain in that. Um,
Yeah.
and it is better when hope is on your side, but it's hard either way. And we're
Yeah.
dealing with so many people in this country who need our care and our support. I think what you're doing is phenomenal. I'm
Yeah.
so glad that
Me
I
too.
reached out and that Nikki told me
Thank you.
about you. I'm thrilled to know you, and I can't wait
Thank
to
you.
to talk more. Thank you for being here today. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
And I appreciate
Thanks
what
so
you're
much for having
doing.
me, Liz. I really appreciate it. And, it's awesome to share this with the audience. So thanks for giving me the platform.
Well, it's very needed. And anyway, I've really appreciated my time with you. So thanks so much for being here. And
Likewise.
we're gonna have you back again for sure.
Cool. Sounds great. Thanks again, Liz.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Take care. We'll see you soon.
Yeah.